So Violet Evergarden is a thing. Violet Evergarden sounds like the name of a poem where the writer is professing their undying love to the titular woman circa the 1800s. But no, Violet Evergarden is an animated television series, or more accurately, it is an anime. Although there is a certain amount of romanticism conveyed by that title that is present in the show, so you wouldn't be off the mark for thinking it was a poem. The show does take place in a fictional past that draws on European influence, and deals heavily in the themes of love and loss. The animation and soundtrack are absolutely gorgeous. So in a way, it is a kind of poem, but a visual poem. And of course, a poem's primary purpose at the end of the day is to elicit feelings from its audience. And holy crap, does Violet Evergarden make me feel a lot of emotions. A single episode can bring anger and laughter, elation and despair, and a lot, and I mean a lot, of tears. And it was in this emotional reaction to this poem-like show that something really interesting happened to me and some of my friends. So today, I want to talk about Violet Evergarden. Violet Evergarden is a television series based on an award-winning manga of the same name by Kana Akatsuki. The show consists of 13 episodes and a single special episode, or OVA, Original Video Animation. Both of these were released in 2018. The original 13-episode season also won a few accolades and was followed up by a full-length movie in 2019. There are rumors currently floating around of another project in development, but it's unclear as things have been pushed back due to certain global events. As I mentioned earlier, and should be abundantly evident by what is on screen, Violet Evergarden is an anime, and for those that are disinterested in a show because of that, I want to stress that anime is not a genre, but a medium. There is certainly a literal or textual language used in anime, and those that are unfamiliar may not understand, but this is simply a way for authors of manga to convey emotions or ideas quickly in a drawn panel format. Anime started out and is often just an adaptation of a drawn art style, and many anime shows use these tropes to great effect. But it is important to remember that not every show uses these effects, as they are cartoony and unrealistic, and that anime and manga as a whole can be about many different things. Of course, mecha anime is the classic, and there's probably an oversaturation of that, although lately isekai is the new mecha. But there are also lots of other genres, just like in any other medium. Romance, fantasy, action, mystery, comedies, slice of life, and cooking, which is ridiculously popular for some reason. So if you find yourself put off by anime as a whole because of the cartoony aesthetics, or because sci-fi is really not your thing, I guarantee that there is an anime series out there that will appeal to you and what you like. And I have to say, I think Violet Evergarden would be a great introduction, as the story is deep, and the high production on the visual department means that there is an emphasis on facial expression to convey emotions. So what is Violet Evergarden about, and why so many feels? Well, interestingly, when I first started watching the show, I was actually disappointed with the first 2 episodes. This has more to do with me and my expectations, rather than how good or bad Violet Evergarden is as a show. Here is where we get to the spoilery bits. So if I've done my job right and you are sufficiently intrigued, you can catch the series, OVA, and movie all on Netflix. So do that now. The whole summary goes like this. As a young child soldier, Violet Evergarden was trained as a weapon of death in a war that is raging across the continent. After a botched military operation, Violet attempts to save the only person who ever saw her as a human being, rather than just as a soldier. Horribly injured herself, Violet is unsuccessful. She witnesses her best friend bleed out in front of her. This catastrophe leaves Violet broken, not just emotionally, but also physically, as she lost both her arms in the conflict. With the help of newly created metallic prosthetics in place of her hands, Violet embarks on a journey to find her friend, whom she is convinced is still alive. That sounds fucking dope, right? It reminds me of one of my other favorite anime. Maybe a little gruesome, but what an adventure that would be. A war story with some steampunk elements set in a World War I era European-esque world? I'd watch the shit out of that. My misconception was that the show is actually not really about any of those things. That whole summary is basically the backstory to a very different kind of show, but one that is way better than whatever I was expecting. Almost from the very beginning of the first episode, Violet wakes up and the war is already over. She is then compelled to find her friend and former commander Major Gilbert. In the first episode, all that happens is Violet pines for Gilbert, learns how to do menial tasks with her new prosthetics, and by the end, she has a job working as a ghostwriter for a former acquaintance of Gilbert's at a mail company. Wait, what the fuck is this show about again? Needless to say, I was a little disappointed, but I stuck with it because the visuals were gorgeous, and there were a few very dramatic scenes from the war, and possibly maybe a deeper subconscious understanding of what was going on. The next episodes were about Violet learning how to be a ghostwriter, or what the show calls an auto-memories doll, for some reason. These episodes are interesting as they introduce some secondary characters, and Violet slowly learns how to interact with people, and that writing a letter isn't about how technically accurate you are, but about putting feelings into words. And then episode 5 happened, and I finally understood what this show was all about. All that setup that takes place in the first episode about the war and the other horrific things that happened to Violet weren't really misleading at all, because all of those horrific things that happened were the point. It wasn't about those things, it was about what happens after those things. The 5th episode is still my favorite, and so we're going to have a quick look at it, as I think it wraps up the whole essence of this series without giving too much away. Titled, "You Write Letters That Help Bring People Together," with a question mark at the end, the episode starts when Violet receives a commission to help a young princess write a series of public love letters to a prince of a foreign kingdom, in the hopes of creating an alliance between the two countries. These two countries were bitter enemies during the war, but of course the feelings of the young princess are also taken into account. Once the first letter from the princess is sent off, with Violet's help, it sparks a back and forth between the prince and the princess, although we only see the princess's side. The episode really doesn't feature any of the previous introduced side characters heavily, instead introducing us to a brand new character with this young princess. And I was blown away. I finally got the point of the show. It's about an exploration of a young woman who was told by Gilbert as he was dying, "I love you." Violet, being a child soldier, doesn't really understand what that means. She becomes a ghostwriter to try and understand what love is. I mean, she basically says that at the end of the first episode, and it took you this long to figure it out? Dumbass. The overarching story is about a girl trying to overcome the trauma of a war that affected her so horrifically. She travels around a continent filled with countries and people trying to overcome their trauma of that same war. Every episode is an exploration of what love is, and not just romantic love, but love in all its different and complex meanings. From the love of a political marriage, or the love that can be born from one's subjects, to the love of a sick mother to her child, a playwright coming to grips with his own daughter's death, a soldier writing a letter to his family. Every episode asks heavy questions by creating really deep characters and relationships, and every episode is relentless on its audience. The movie is no exception. It explores the relationship between two adopted sisters separated by the circumstances of the war. They're not even related to each other, but the deep bond of their love drives the younger of the two to find her older sister. The movie and the soldier episode were particularly hard for me to get through. I was crying at the end of both, but whereas the movie had me in tears because of how sad and heartwarming it was, the soldier episode had me outright sobbing. Violet Evergarden is a show that can make you understand that love is so complex, and every episode makes you cry, but in very different ways. I feel like just as Violet is learning what love is by writing all these letters for different people, we're learning what love is by watching the show. That alone is enough for me to give the show exceptionally high praise. Everyone should see this show. But there is another reason that it became one of my favorites, and that is because of how I experienced it with my friends. The show was released weekly back in 2018, and I didn't watch Violet Evergarden with others in the same room, but I had a few friends who were also keeping up with that season. I can remember the episode with the soldier really, really well, and immediately after I messaged my friend and we were both destroyed emotionally. A few days after the movie came out, another friend of mine messaged me, and he was absolutely distraught. The show was that powerful and effective that we were all terribly emotional with one another. We talked and gushed about the show and did a lot of crying together, and the best part is that all of us were male. When I was young, I often prided myself on not crying during movies or television shows because it's not what boys did. Of course, that is a bogus sentiment. As I grew up, I had no problems being open about my emotions. Many of my friends will tell you that the problem is probably that I'm too open. But sadness, and in particular crying and tears, were still hard to express openly with others. Violet Evergarden wasn't the first time I cried openly with another person because I was affected by a piece of media or literature, but it was the first time in an all-male friend group. I felt comfortable with expressing my sadness and tears with others, and I think they felt the same way too. Perhaps that is because the message of Violet Evergarden is so much more than just simple sadness. I am really struggling with expressing exactly what I mean when I say just how many feelings I have after watching a single episode of this show. Every episode has a different kind of love, and euphoria, and sadness, and elation, and depression, and ecstasy, and other academic-sounding synonyms for emotions. Maybe I need someone like Violet's help in writing this script. But regardless of my inability to express myself, there's so much emoting that happens after an episode that I almost feel like it's impossible not to talk about it with someone else, or I'll just explode. I'm feeling emotional right now as I remember some of these episodes and write about them. And I'm getting emotional again right now as I read it out loud. Violet Evergarden is an amazing show, and my disappointment at its initial lack of an adventure story was quickly overshadowed by my appreciation for its deeply evocative narrative. I returned week after week and cried almost every single time, and then shared it with my friends, and then I couldn't wait to cry again next week, knowing that I had a circle of dudes that felt the same way, and were keen to share their ideas and emotions in a way that was free of judgment. Violet wrote her letters with the intention of breaking down barriers between people by showing how they felt, and the show Violet Evergarden broke down emotional barriers between a male friend group that traditionally is not supposed to show vulnerability to one another. The act of watching a show that is unashamed to talk so openly about love gave us the ability to express our feelings, put them into words, and then share with each other not just the love of a show, but a kind of love and camaraderie with one another. And that is why I loved Violet Evergarden. Here are just a few reasons why I cried. Because of the anthology-style narrative, every episode can take liberties in terms of how much time Violet spends with each character and how much time passes between episodes. The visuals are so gorgeous. It just makes everything look so good. Every crying face in the show makes you sympathize and empathize more with the characters. The movie was so well done and was such a pleasant surprise because I really did not know it was coming out, and it utterly destroyed me in exactly the way that I wanted, just like some of my other favorite episodes, like the letter episode, or the opera episode, or the soldier episode. Oh, no. Hey, thanks for watching that video. It was really hard to make as every time I tried to do an edit I would wind up in tears, but I hope you enjoyed this show as much as I did. If you did, be sure to check out some of the other shows I recommend on these video essays, or stick around for our awesome weekly podcast called Cinemasters Ultimate Timeline.